Hi, in this video I just want to go through 2 points that are often overlooked but are very important to getting a good mix, and they are gain staging and corrective EQ. So I'll just briefly go over gain staging, which is basically just making sure that the signal is at an optimum level as it travels through the signal flow of your mix. And I don't mean it's as loud as possible. I mean that it's not too loud, giving you enough headroom so that if you need to boost something with EQ, you won't overload the output of that plugin, and that it's not too low so that you end up boosting the output of a plugin that may generate self-noise. Some of the analog simulation plugins generate a small amount of self-noise, and if you send a very low signal into them and then boost the output, you'll actually be increasing the amount of noise coming out of that plugin. Whereas if you send a nice healthy signal to it, you won't be boosting the output of the plugin, and you won't be increasing noise. Going into distortion in a DAW is generally not recommended. Driving the bus of an analog mixing desk can generate harmonic content that sounds very pleasing by overloading transformers and such. But inside the digital world, you're really just running out of numbers, and it generally makes the mix sound smaller and is not beneficial. So really, we want to see around -16 dBFS, which is equal to 0 dB on a VU meter on an analog piece of equipment. So when you first play your mix, just have a look at these here. They will give you an idea of what the peak level of that channel is, and if it's very, very high and you think that you're not going to get a lot of headroom from it, like say it's -4 or something even above that, you generally would need to bring down the volume. So you can do that two ways. You could reduce the volume of the actual audio file with clip gain, or you can set up a trim plugin, which just gives you access to boost or cut the volume of the signal going into the channel before it hits any plugins. Another thing that's beneficial is to try and keep your faders around the 0 mark. You can see here that this movement from here to here is 6 decibels, whereas that same distance from here to here would be 25 decibels. So really, keeping your faders at unity will give you the most accurate control over the level of the signal. Certain plugins don't react well to too much signal, and will actually start falling apart sound-wise if they're given too much level. So keep an eye on the signal going into buses. So all of these drums are going into this auxiliary channel. So I would have to be aware of the cumulative value of all of that audio not being too loud to overload the input of this bus. Also, all the tracks going to the master fader, you want to make sure that you don't have any clipping. Be aware of the output of a plugin that greatly increases the volume. Maybe adjust the output of that plugin so that you can bypass it and still hear the same level. Then you can assess the sound of the plugin correctly. If everything is just louder, it'll always sound better. But also how that output of that plugin then interacts with the input of the next plugin below it. If it's boosting the signal a lot, you might end up clipping in between 2 plugins, from the output of one to the input of the other, and not be aware of it because the output of the second plugin might be quite low and you won't see clipping on your actual channel fader. So next is Corrective EQ. I have here a track from Andrew Cole called Dead Roses, and this is available for download as a multitrack from Telefunken and from the Cambridge Audio Multitrack's website, which is a great resource for people who are looking to practice mixing. So this was a demo recording, as far as I know, for Telefunken microphones. So it's been recorded very, very well, and it's available there for you to download. I'll leave links in the description. The reason I call it Corrective EQ is because we're not trying to change the tonal balance of the instrument. We're just trying to clean up the sound. If a signal is far too bassy, then it probably is corrective EQing to reduce some of the excess low end. But generally, we'll accept the signals in this recording as being good, and we'll just enhance them by getting rid of unnecessary audio. So I'm going to start with a first lot of plugins, which are just EQs, which I've set to be high-pass filters. So we are just filtering out the low end. So on the kick drum, I'll just activate them all. On the kick drum, I have low frequency roll-off at 24 hertz. And just for this video, I've used quite a sharp Q. So it's a very aggressive filter. The softer the Q, the more natural the roll-off will be, and it will sound. For instance, if I was to aggressively filter everything below 600 hertz, the signal won't sound very natural because it will suddenly just drop off in content. If we wanted to take things out below 600, we would probably use quite a soft curve. In this situation, I'm treating it as the audio below the point at which I set the filter is not audio that's musical content, so I'm setting a very aggressive filter. On the snare drum, now this is once again debatable. Some people would say this is far too high and some far too low. Just for this video, I've set it at 100 hertz, so it's below the fundamental frequency of this particular snare drum. Sometimes the low end is necessary to keep far lower on a snare drum. In this case, I don't think it is. On the bass guitar, I've set the high pass to 32 hertz, so it's below the fundamental frequency of the bass. And I've also taken out everything above 5.8K with my low pass filter. We can also clean up the high end of our mix by taking out signals that are not necessary. So there's no real musical content above 6,000 hertz on this bass guitar. So by taking out that, I'm leaving more space for my cymbals and such. On the guitar, I've taken out below 67 hertz, the fundamental frequency of the guitar being 80. And then on my electric guitar, I have filtered out below 60 and above 8. Generally, anything above 10,000 hertz from an electric guitar is not that musical sounding, and you can clean up the sound of a guitar an awful lot just by filtering out the high end. So let's have a listen. First of all, I will bypass all of my high pass filters and we'll just listen to the tune, and then I'll activate them all, and hopefully you'll hear how much cleaner the mix sounds just with me filtering out low end.
1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I should have kissed you, not dismissed you. I may amuse you, and all of the moonlight sparkling down from the sky, blue diamond.
You can see when the plugin is deactivated, it's blue, dark blue, and then grey when it's active. So it's quite obvious how much clearer the whole mix sounds just by taking out low-end information. We're freeing up the ability of the speakers to replay the musical information by not asking them to replay super low frequencies. And a lot of these low frequencies, a lot of these filters will actually have a slight resonance just before they drop off. So if we pick 60 hertz, we'll get a slight increase at 60 hertz just before the filters out the signal, and that can actually bolster the bass. So a lot of the time by filtering out low frequencies, we can actually enhance the bass sound of the mix. So let's just have a listen from a different point in the song.
Sweetness of your smile.
It's deactivated. So it does a lot to tighten up the sound. The next step is to actually notch out frequencies that are not needed. So usually I would just sit and listen to the music for quite a while, and whenever anything stood out to me, I'd solo the track and have a listen and see if I could take out those frequencies. So here I've chosen a few beforehand, and so on the snare, if we have a look at the snare drum,
there are roses in your hair. Can you smell?
it's really just that mid-range kind of honk. And so with the EQ, I'm just tightening up the sound, so you're focusing more on the kind of 1K up impact and taking out the kind of honk in the lower mids. With the overheads, a similar situation. With the bass. And our second bass, DI. You can hear there's a little bit too much sub. So we're just dipping out a little bit of that at 40 hertz and then again at 80, just to tighten up the sound and make it more usable in the mix. That's also the electric guitar, or sorry, the acoustic guitar. We can have a look. I'm just pulling out some of those honks. Let's have a listen to them. So the way to find them is basically to notch EQ. So really, let's have a listen to this acoustic guitar. So what I'm doing is I'm picking a very narrow Q and I'm boosting it quite severely and sweeping through until I hear something kind of ring out. So that's a resonance. It's either, it can be sometimes a room problem, or sometimes it's just a build-up in frequencies. On an electric guitar, a small combo, you'll have loads of problems around 1000 to 4000 hertz. So it's really just finding where there's build-ups of frequencies and reducing that to give it a more clean and defined sound. If you go hunting through and find every single one and pull them all out severely, you'll take a lot of the energy out. So it's kind of a balancing act of knowing how much to take out, which you'll get used to by doing it. A handy feature on the EQ from Pro Tools is if you press Control and Shift, you can actually just listen to the frequency that you're trying to remove. So you can hear there that we were looking for that kind of ring in the lower mids, and we can actually just go and find it with the EQ. So around there, just pull it out. So now let's have a listen to the mix with Corrective EQ. Which is basically not changing the tonal balance of the audio, but it is just removing build-ups of frequencies. So.
There are roses in your hair. Can you smell roses like candy in the air?
So we have no corrective EQ.
There are roses in your hair.
And corrective EQ.
There are
So without making any creative choices in the mix, just by purely cleaning out build-ups of frequencies and frequencies that are outside the musical range of the instruments, we can improve the quality of the mix drastically. And from there, we can start making creative choices, as in, I want to warm up the sound of the bass, or I want to brighten up this guitar, I want to make the kick drum have more punch, and so on and so forth. So it's a good idea to start by making sure that you've got good signals that have enough headroom for you to continue processing them if you need to. Make sure that your faders are all around unity so that you've got more control over the volume of each instrument while you're mixing. And make sure you've rolled out the frequencies that are unnecessary, so below and above the frequency range of the instruments, and also swept through and listened for resonances and build-ups in certain frequencies and removed them. So once again, I'll just let you hear. So a narrow Q and a boost. We can hear something there. Now that might actually just be removing energy. If it doesn't sound nasty, maybe it should stay in. So let's have a listen to it in the mix.
There are roses in your hair. Can you smell roses? Like
And it sounds better not taking out 270 hertz because it is adding weight to the sound of the snare drum. So be careful not to take out too much, and to make sure when you do choose to notch a frequency out, you don't take too much of it out. For the example here, I'm using -3, -2.5 dB, just to make it really obvious when you're listening on YouTube. In reality, these cuts may only be half a decibel. So we're really trying to keep the authentic sound and not change its tonal balance, but just clean it up so it's the best it can be before we start making our assessments on whether it needs to be changed tonally from the original tracking session. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful, and I'll be continuing to upload videos with handy little tips on mixing and equipment. Cheers!